In deep space, Cortana was currently in her state of suspended animation, though she managed to keep her array of limited but thankfully still sensors operational to keep a good eye on things while the Master Chief slept before her. She managed to keep track of the time and knew that it had been at least 3 to 4 months since the final battle there on the Ark with the Gravemind, the Covenant Loyalists, the Flood, and the Prophet of Truth. It was all over, and now they were floating in space inside the Forward Unto Dawn awaiting rescue. She naturally had her doubts but placed them aside for now as she had other matters to think of. She recalled her promise to help protect him from harm and keep him safe without compromising her loyalty to the UNSC and humanity. It was something that helped her keep herself together when she had been trapped in high charity for a long time, and it helped her pull herself together at the last moment when she felt herself nearly give in to the despair she felt when he came to rescue her. Cortana had decided to file away a good portion of her data stores for now, the data on the Forerunners, the Flood, the Halo Array, and anything else that would be better kept stored someplace else to free up more room in her system. That had been demanding for her as she had limited power supplies to work with, and some of the data archive banks on the still intact Forward Unto Dawn were filled with other types of information, so she had to be selective of which data she needed to keep and needed to get rid of. With that done, she felt herself be a lot more able to operate and not be burdened with too much data for now. As she rested, she made sure to keep some of her core systems online to keep watch over the area as well as John as he lay there sleeping. He had a lot of injuries, but he was tougher than he looked and made of stern stuff, which was why she knew he would be fine. That certainly didn't mean that she was going to be lax in keeping a close eye on him though as she rested for the time being. However, as she recorded the movements of the ruined frigate through the void of space, something tripped her sensors and she quickly woke herself up from her hibernation and began to gather the information that was coming in from the sensors. Apparently there was a planet nearby, and from what she could gather it was a habitable one, and it was having some strange energy readings below it. The UNSCA. I wondered on her options. With the dawn the way it was, there was no way that they were heading back to Earth anytime soon, so she had to make a snap decision on how to best proceed on this situation. The frigate was very much their only way to be rescued by a ship, but without any contact from incoming ships, they could be stuck there for who knew how long. On the surface of this unknown world, they would be able to find supplies, and be in a more stable location to establish contact and initiate rescue, however that presented risks. There was no telling if the species that called the location home would be hospitable or hostile. If they spotted John and found her, who knew what would happen? However, from what she had been able to piece together from what she had been able to scan, they didn't have much in terms of choices for now. On the surface, at least they were able to set up a base camp and then make a rudimentary COM system to call for help, and being in a set location was far better than drifting about in space for who knew how long. She brought herself back to full status and decided to have a full run-through of the supplies and equipment on board the Forward Unto Dawn before making her choice and waking up the Spartan who had been her protector for years. They were going to need all they could get in order to survive in this new world. She also needed to find a good place to land the frigate when given the chance. As she ran through the data stores, she also gathered what data she could of the planet. There appeared to be 3 large continents. One was an icy location and the other 2 were on either side of the said ice continent. She also spotted a massive storm cell there. What surprised her was that the storm cell in question dwarfed anything on record on such storm cells and didn't seem to be moving. The other 2 continents were fairly balanced in appearance and environment, perfect for habitation. Not only that, she had determined that the power sources she was picking up were genuine and not ghost images on her scanners. Once she had done a full inventory check on the Forward Unto Dawn's supplies and equipment that remained, she decided to wake up John. She knew that they would have a lot of things to do before they were going to the planet. She quickly activated the low-level systems online while making sure to check her Spartan's vital signs and make sure that he was not too badly injured in his time in cryostasis. As soon as the systems were online, she began to undergo the procedure while checking John's vitals, happy that his vital signs were all green and in good condition. She looked to see the pod open and out came the massive wave of freezing gases, and soon she waited for John to wake up. She didn't have to wait for long as John began to move a bit slowly, showing that he was finally waking up from his slumber in the pod. And from what she could see, he was doing all right for now. As for John, he opened his eyes just as the Mjolnir's OS began to activate the systems. He made a quick systems check and saw that despite the damage his Mjolnir Mark 6 armor had sustained in the battles he had been in after escaping from the dreadnought, it was still very much in good condition. He quickly ran a much-needed full systems diagnostic to be on the safe side, and as soon as that was done, he moved out of the pod slowly as the lack of gravity kicked in and he floated towards the hollow tank towards Cortana. Enjoyed the shut-eye. John smirked a bit inside his helmet at the smile on Cortana's face. He then noticed that she looked a bit different, a bit lighter in shade in her usual color design and seemed to be a bit more stable. He was quick to comment on those said changes. "You look to be alright." Quotation mark. "Yeah, placed aside a lot of the data I stored to free up some processing space. Feels a lot better on my system too." Quotation mark. "So I see. Something wrong." Cortana was quick to fill the Master Chief in on what she had found, and the Spartan was quick to listen in on what she was able to tell him. He was not entirely pleased by the fact that they had not been rescued as of yet, but seeing that they didn't much options at the moment, couldn't argue. Besides, being in one location would give them a chance to establish a base of operations and be able to send out communications to passing by ships instead of drifting around space and landing who knows where, well away from any passing shipping lanes. With their options weighed, the Spartan decided that they were going to have to chance the landing on the planet. He moved to get his MA5 CICWS assault rifle from the weapon rack and moved to grab another floating weapon, a fully loaded M6G Magnum. Checking both guns and seeing that they were in good working order, he placed them on his back and right thigh and made his way through the ship after placing Cortana back into his armor by sliding her data chip into the back of his head. As soon as he got to one of the Dawn's armory stations, he quickly began to gather what he needed: spare packs of ammunition, spare weapons, communications gear, medical supplies and some needed rations. As soon as he was able to get enough of the supplies, he made a quick trip to a nearby section where the odds-to-have pods were stationed. He quickly began to load one of the pods with the supplies, weapons, communications gear, and spare ammunition. Once that was done, he made it to a nearby HEV to see if it was also usable. Finding it to be more than ready for use, he moved back to the armory station to get anything else he would need with him apart from what he already had on him. He managed to take a SRS-99D, S2AM sniper rifle with all the needed ammunition as well as a spare energy sword. Apparently the Arbiter had left this behind as he had other spare swords and weapons to choose from. No sense not bringing this along in his mind, and he knew just how potent this weapon was. After all, he had been on the receiving end of this weapon more times than he dared to count and had used this on a few occasions, and while he was more accustomed to fighting in long range, he was no slouch in using this weapon if it was needed for him to go close range. He placed the weapon on his back and decided to carry a combat knife as well in a metallic sheath on his left thigh, and with those weapons on, he made sure to grab enough supplies for himself in his own HEV. While he was doing those things, he was talking to Cortana to figure out the plans they would need to finalize if they were going to get down to the ground. "So how are we going to make sure that the Dawn will land in one piece?" "I am planning to angle the Dawn to make sure that its still intact armor plating will be able to have a significantly better chance of avoiding being burned badly by atmospheric re-entry. The superstructure might be badly damaged, but it will be strong enough for both re-entry and landing. The angle will also prevent the cut sections from being exposed, which could result in massive damage to the core systems and room." Quotation mark. "What about the rest of the ship's internal systems?" "I plan to seal off the core sections and lock down the important areas of the ship. The blast doors have enough power to do so, since despite the low power supplies there is enough residual power from the fusion reactors to do all the sealing." Quotation mark. John nodded at that as he ran through his inventory for the last time and then began to type in a command sequence into the other HEV to make it open only when he would be the one to type in a special code command into a hidden console. The HEVs would be key to his operations there on the planet once he hit the ground of the unknown world. Once everything was ready, he got into the HEV and Cortana was the one who made the calculations, and as soon as she gave the signal, the Master Chief activated the deploy order, and soon all he felt was the sudden release of the clamps that held the HEV, and soon he was shooting out of the Dawn just as Cortana fired a small but powerful satellite drone from the Dawn to act as their eyes and ears in space. The satellite was armed with a solar power cell and recharging system, so it was not in need of refueling and had onboard computers for maintaining its functions, while the Spartan and the AI were on the surface and would relay information to them easily enough. He looks at the Dawn through the monitors as the HEV of the frigate began to reach the atmosphere of the planet. He looked as the deep orange glow as well as the bright streaks that showed that the frigate had now made contact with outer area of the atmosphere while he and the other HEV were already moving past it and into the atmosphere. Despite the considerable heat shielding, the Spartan had no doubt that the heat outside of his HEV was more than enough to fry a human in nanoseconds and melt regular metal into nothing. He was not frightened at all as he had done this before and that had been many times as well in his long career as a Spartan too, but he knew the stories involved with HEV deployment. HEVs were the odds best way to deploy onto a planet's surface, carrying enough supplies, spare weapons, a radio, portable power supply, and can serve as a shelter if necessary. Other dedicated variants can also have a lot of other items and equipment needed for commando operations as well as command and control operations. However, these were notorious for failures. If the pod had been damaged before or during re-entry, then the ceramic skin plating would fail, along with the lead foil in a spectacular and violent fashion, and the occupant would be cooked alive in the intense heat that was to come. Another way the pod would fail was a malfunction in the onboard computer which could make the outer plating chute release prematurely, causing the pod to accelerate to the point that the person dies or loses consciousness from the excessive G-forces. The next was the failure of the computer to control the booster rockets used for controlled deceleration, causing them to fail and crash hard. Odds feared this kind of death as it was like digging your own grave, and he had heard stories of HEVs smashing into lakes, rivers, mountainsides and more besides. That was why he was very careful when he selected the HEVs he was going to use. Cortana was currently handling this part of the mission and he left it into her hands. Horizontal ellipsis. On the surface of the planet, a lush forest filled with trees, grass and the like was enjoying what would have been a quiet night. The screaming arrival of a pair of UNSC HEVs was going to change all that. The first pod smashed a good distance away from the other pod and landed a very fair distance south of it, crashing near a lake. The other pod smashed through a nearby series of branches, the wood being reduced into splinters in mere moments as the HEV crashed with a resounding thud. As soon as the dust began to settle, the HEV seemed to cool as smoke surrounded it briefly. After a few moments, a massive hissing sound was heard and the door blew off from the HEV. The release door was sent flying right into a large boulder and smashed the rock hard, breaking off several parts of it through sheer force. As soon as that was over, the Spartan stood up from the crash seat and began to take stock of his surroundings, while Cortana did her usual scanning of the entire area to see just what it was she could find that John might miss. And she was seeing a good deal. Nice. The trees are huge around here. Here, almost the same height as some of the trees back on Reach and some of the colony worlds. Plus I'm picking up massive energy waves and readings. Some of them or rather nearly all of them don't seem to match to anything I have on record. Quotation mark. The Spartan looked the place over once more, scanning for threats, and as soon as he was in the clear, he moved out of the pod and loosened the sniper rifle from its rack and took the ammunition packs and stored them away in the containers on his Mjolnir. Once he was assured that he had a full combat load for his weapons, he moved out, but not before getting to stripping the pod of supplies and equipment. It took less time due to his enhancements and soon the HEV was stripped of anything that could be of use. He then placed the supplies into a rucksack and placed it on his back while using the nearby magnetic plate on the rucksack to hold his MA-5C. With that done, he spoke to Cortana as he looked to see the fiery entry of the frigate a very large distance away from them. How far are we from the dawn? Hold on. Getting the data now. We're a good 2,800 kilometers and it's near the coastline at some slight hilly terrain. I can bet that our little entrance didn't go unnoticed by the natives on this planet. Quotation mark. Right, and the other half. At least a full 200 kilometers from our current position. It's not been tampered as of yet and it's in a valley of sorts near a rock face. I suppose we need to head that way, right? Roger. Quotation mark. With that the Spartan moved out, carrying the massive sniper rifle ahead of him and moving through the undergrowth and trees, his senses fully attuned to the environment and focused on locating open and covert threats. After all, with no known data on this world, he would have to be extremely cautious in his movements through the place. As the Spartan moved through the foliage, he was quick to pick up several contacts behind him as his motion tracker was more than enough to pick up movement. However, they were not showing up as hostiles as they seemed to be intent on keeping a fair distance from him at this moment, and his sensors had not picked up weapon impacts on his shields or the Mjolnir itself. Cortana was quick to pick them and she spoke to him. Looks like we're not alone. Quotation mark. Right, they don't seem hostile for the moment, but that could change easily enough. Quotation mark. The Spartan decided to let the group following him alive for the moment. Whoever they were trying their best to keep a good distance from him, no doubt trying to determine him if he was to be considered a threat or a curiosity. As much as he wanted to turn about and face these would-be trackers, he decided to pretend to not notice them and let them continue. This way he would be able to use his Mjolnir's built-in sensors and systems to keep an eye on them. Of course he naturally turned about every now and then, doing so made them stop and spread out in a pattern he recognized as an evasion and concealment maneuver. Whoever they were, they had a good grasp of military tactics and were doing their best to keep themselves out of his sight, not that it was going to do them much good. Apart from enhancing a Spartan 2's already deadly eyesight, showing equipment status, linking to the Spartan's neural interface, the helmet of the Mjolnir Mark 6 was armed with thermal and motion sensors, as well as built-in binoculars, solar-powered flashlight, filters for hostile environments, built-in air supply for EVA work and maneuvers, and more besides. This was why he was able to spot his trackers easily enough. He could see them through the thermal systems, though he couldn't get a visual on them as they remained hidden in the undergrowth. As far as he could tell, their body temperatures were around human temperatures, though with some slight differences, and judging by their numbers, they appeared to be in a group numbering 12 or so. Cortana then commented as they turned about and moved on, allowing their trackers to keep moving. They don't seem interested in attacking you yet. If they were part of the Covenant, they would have just attacked us already. Quotation mark. I guess. Still, we don't know who or what they are, so no sense not taking precautions. Quotation mark. Cortana smiled at that and then she spoke. Hold up, I think they are talking to one another. I can intercept them and hear what they're saying. Quotation mark. Horizontal ellipsis. The other party. By Elun's grace, what is he? The people following the Spartan as he moved through the underbrush were the Kaldori, or the Children of the Stars, but to the residents of the lands of Kalimdor as well as Azeroth and those of both the Alliance and Horde races, they were the Night Elves. They had lived in these lands for millennia and have taken part in what was the Third War. They had once fought both the Alliance and the Horde when both factions came to the shores of Kalimdor, but then joined their sides in a fight to ensure the survival of their people when the Burning Legion had arrived to finish what they had begun all those centuries before. After the war, the Night Elves formed an alliance with the forces of the humans, the gnomes, and the dwarves for mutual defense and also for survival. While many of the more traditional Night Elves disliked working with the younger races, those in the Sisterhood of Elun, their governing body sees this alliance as a chance to defend their people until they recovered, having lost many of their kin during the Third War. And while they were aware that not everyone in the alliance trusted them, they were willing to overlook it to make sure that they were able to ensure the survival of their race as a whole. This group tracking the Master Chief was a band of sentinels, the military arm of the Night Elf race, and they were comprised of a number of Third War veterans, so they were very wary of newcomers. With them were a number of druids who were to serve as support and healers for the group as well. They had seen everything that had to be seen in this world, but now they were tracking something that defied everything that they had ever seen before in their long lives. They had been on patrol when they spotted a massive flaming star come down hard a good distance from them and spotted two more heading in another direction. As soon as the three objects hit the ground, they were shocked by the impact. The impact from the massive one was enough to be felt even from their distance, though it was not powerful enough to rival an earthquake. They had no idea what was going on, but one of the druids, a druid of the Claw, decided that they should check on the smaller ones and find out what they were first to figure out if these were from the Burning Legion. They found the first, and to their surprise it was not an infernal as some of them feared. In fact, it wasn't emanating a single shred of fell energy at all. It resembled a strange egg-like object with 4 tall spikes on the top, and what appeared to be glass on one area. They had no idea what it was, but they quickly tensed up when it suddenly cracked in some areas to release smoke. The area there with the glass suddenly fired outwards in a loud crash. And then out came a massive behemoth of a being before their shocked eyes. Even though they had seen many horrors and wonders over the years, the sight of this being before them was unlike anything the Night Elves had ever seen before in their lives. It looked human, but it had green and black skin that after a closer look resembled armor, and a golden faceplate that hid anything from their eyes. They managed to keep their distance from the being as they watched it strip that metallic object with ease in the move out. When it turned to look at their direction, they quickly hid themselves from sight as best they could. The leader, Kaelin Nightwalker, looked at the human-shaped behemoth with absolute worry. She had never seen anything like him before in her life. She had been a veteran archer and had plenty of experience fighting not just the humans, their allies, the orcs and their own allies, but also the Burning Legion's minions, and had seen a lot ever since the end of the Third War. But this massive human-sized being in what appeared to be armor that she didn't recognize beat anything she had seen in her life. And those weapons he had on him were unlike anything she had seen before as well. They easily resembled the guns she had seen the other races of the Alliance and the Horde would carry, but these looked completely different. She turned to one of her followers and spoke. Have you seen anything like that before? No, sister. Even I have never seen it before. Can it be a new type of demon from the Legion's ranks? One of the druids shook his head. No, he's not releasing any fell energy from his form. Such energies would have tripped our senses and also damaged the land as he moves through them. Quotation mark. But how can we be sure? We have no idea just how many other minions the Legion has on their side, and this could be one of them. Quotation mark. Another druid shook his head. I doubt it. I have seen the Legion's agents use weapons before, such as guns with infernal magic. Those this giant carries don't match them at all. Quotation mark. Kalen weighed their options and decided that they will have to keep track of this new arrival, and if it was a threat, they were going to have to try and stop it from reaching their villages. Though she had her doubts on how she and her veteran allies would be able to fight this massive being before them. She however knew her duties well, and she was not in the mood to make any mistakes with such an unknown being. She took out her bow and moved for her group to continue tracking the green and black armored giant. While they followed the Spartan, conversations were still flying about between them on what they would have to do with this new possible threat. We need to alert the others about this being quickly. Quotation mark. True, but we have to be careful. This being is unknown to us at the moment, and attacking it might turn out to be a mistake. Quotation mark. Several more discussions were flying between the night elves, which were kept hushed so as not to attract the attention of the being they were tracking. All the while, Kaylin was still trying her best to weigh in her options on how to deal with this new being. Should she approach with peaceful intentions, attack quickly and hope that she and her party could slay it before it became a threat, observe its progress and hope that it steered clear of the settlements? So many thoughts ran through the night elf's head as she kept her eyes dead center on her quarry. Every so often, the group stopped talking when the Spartan turned to look around, hoping to avoid him, and when he moved, they would talk again to determine their course of action while trying to find anything to determine just who and what was this stranger. Horizontal ellipsis. Unknown to the night elves, their supposedly hushed and private conversations was already being listened to by their quarry. The Mjolnir Mark VI had remarkable sensor systems as was needed for the kinds of battles that the Spartan eyes would be taking part in. And the auditory sensors were part of it. Being able to filter out ambient noises to focus on specific ones was an advantage that the Spartan eyes took full advantage of in all of their battles with the Covenant. Being able to hear a water droplet hitting the sandy floor of a desert in a sandstorm was a deadly advantage when it came to avoiding ambushes. John himself had above average hearing, and while that could have been augmented, the scientists and Dr. Halsey agreed that doing it would have been counter-productive and otherwise very dangerous, as a sensitive ear would have been a major weakness in the massive chaos of a firefight, as that would weaken the Spartans' concentration and leave them vulnerable. That and the fact that the Mjolnir was more than able to handle that department was why augmented hearing was not given to the Spartans. The conversations coming from his trackers told the Spartan that the beings were intelligent enough, having such articulate and high-level communication skills. He could also tell from the tones and pitches that the group was co-gender with a mix of male and female voices. The one thing that really set him on edge was the fact that their language was unlike anything he had heard of, as the night elves were speaking in their native dialect Darnashan, which was totally foreign to the Spartan and his AI companion. Cortana, can you translate what they are saying? The AI listened in, and after a few moments, she replied. Negative, John, their language is completely foreign to me. It matches nothing in the UNSC database or even that of the Covenant, so I can't translate it. Whoever they are certainly an unrecorded race. Quotation mark. John did not like that. This was a first contact situation for sure. Here he was with Cortana on an unknown world with unknown beings tracking him. They were certainly not of the Covenant separatists or the Loyalists, since the first group would have revealed themselves to him to aid him in some fashion, and the second group would have just settled for killing him. And there was no way they were part of the Flood at all, as the Flood wouldn't bother and just try to either convert him into one of their disgusting combat forms or a command form. And it turned his stomach a bit at the thought of being part of another born Gravemind. Spartans were never frightened. The closest thing that matched that particular emotion was unease, and the Master Chief was feeling it. He could have turned around and dealt with his pursuers easily enough, but he had to make sure that he had to make his choices clear to him. Even if he was a Spartan and his record was near spotless, he was not going to take any risk and antagonize potential allies. Besides that, he was alone and with limited supplies and options until he could find the other heb that had been deployed that carried what he needed to set up for a while until he could get back to the forward onto dawn. However, the Spartan decided that now was the right time to lose his pursuers and turn the tables on them for a change. Cortana was quick to pick up on the idea, and she replied to that. Good idea, at least we can see just who is tracking you. Quotation mark. With that, the Spartan was quick to take off at breakneck speed through the trees. This was like a light jog for the Spartan, but the results of his sudden acceleration were startling to his pursuers. Horizontal ellipsis. By the goddess. Kaylin and her fellow sentinels were suddenly stunned out of their wits when the massive giant suddenly took off before their eyes with such speed and agility that was more than what they expected from such a massive and armored being. They tried to run after it, but when they arrived at a nearby clearing, the massive being had just vanished from sight. Kaylin had no idea how to react to this sudden change and looked about briefly in absolute worry. Unknown to her and the rest of her team, they were now the ones who were being observed by the Spartan and his AI companion. The Spartan was hiding nearby several large rocks that managed to form a fairly well-hidden wall of rock with a crack in it as the Spartan looked at the night elves. Horizontal ellipsis. John and Cortana looked at their pursuers, and the only thing that they both agreed on was this. These were not Covenant. Who the heck are they? John looked at the night elves, trying to make sense on what the heck was he looking at. They were human-sized and had the exact same body profile as humans. The Spartan, however, saw that they were certainly not humans as he knew his race to be. They all had purple skin, though some had lighter and darker shades of the same skin color, long ears that moved backwards, different colored hair, odd tribal-style markings on their faces, and glowing eyes. The men who were there had amber glowing eyes, while the women had silver or light blue or teal glowing eyes as well. The females who were there in the group appeared to be warriors. Their body structure confirmed it as the Spartan looked at them intently with a soldier's eye. They had the muscle tone and structure to show combat training, and the way they looked about showed their skill as trackers and archers, along with the fact that most of them carried such weapons. The Spartan also saw their armor, or what passed as armor. There was some sort of short tank top with scales that had metal rims on them, along with armored pauldrons with the same scale-like design with the same metal rims around it that glittered in the moonlight, as well as feathers of some bird species on them. They also had something that resembled armored thigh and hip guards with the same scale design and had metal outer plating on them of an unknown design. They also had arm guards made from what seemed to be leather with metal guards and leg guards that ended above the knee. The women's bows were made from a very hard type of wood, and it appeared that the bows were of excellent craftsmanship, and their short swords were also well made. As for the men, they appeared to be very strong in terms of muscle structure and size, wearing leather armor from the looks of it and carrying staves with crystals and feathers, while another part of them carried what appeared to be long claws of metal or hard bone on their forearms like fist weapons. Their amber eyes glowed as they too were no doubt trying to track him down alongside their female kin. John then spoke to Cortana. What exactly are we looking at? For once, Cortana was speechless, at least for a moment or two until she spoke. I'm not so sure. Genetic offshoots of humans maybe, they could be mutations and the like, but I have my doubts. One thing is for sure, they are not Covenant. They aren't carrying anything that we recognize. In fact, their armor and weaponry is almost like what was used during the early 10th century B.C. and A.D. and onwards. Quotation mark. That left John with more questions than answers, but the most burning one was this. What kind of planet did him and Cortana land in? That idea was soon taken from his train of thought when several loud cries were heard, and out of nowhere came a large number of other beings. The Spartan was quick to turn around and face them, and both he and Cortana were surprised once more. The new arrivals were certainly different from the ones they had been studying no less than a few minutes ago. They were green-skinned humanoids who looked huge and were nearly as tall as John, both in and out of his Mjolnir Mark VI armor. They appeared to have long beards and had a pair of lower tusk-like teeth that jutted from their lower jaws prominently, flat noses that resembled those of pigs, and pointed ears that were like that of the previous race that the Spartan was studying, yet not in the same length. While the first race was human-like in form and appearance, the new group were certainly different, and their choice of armor reflected that, as they wore different sections of armor that were of metal and leather. They also carried axes and spears, with the former weapons looking wicked and razor sharp, and the latter looking just as deadly. The others were dressed in robes that had odd symbols on them, and they seemed to have some sort of energy glowing from their hands. The next creature was huge, a two-headed monster that carried a wicked club the size of a tree trunk with steel bands on it and a thick, sharpened stone head. The one thing that John noted on the new arrivals that was common was a hammer-like tattoo on their bodies and clothing as well as their armor. Cortana was even more surprised by this as she spoke. Who or what are they? The two got the answer as one of the women warriors shouted out in what was shockingly the human language of English in Cortana's records. Orcs. One of the now identified beings roared out and raised its weapon, a spear, and aimed it at the other group and shouted in the same human language as the woman did, further shocking the Spartan and his AI companion. Kill those purple-skinned night elves. The Spartan watched as the two groups suddenly fought one another. The women fired arrows into the beings called orcs and managed to kill a number of them who were charging right at them at full power. However, some of the orcs were not giving up as some fired their spears into the night elves' ranks and several were wounded, some with scratches and others with more serious wounds. These orcs apparently had reinforcements as more of their kind began to pour forward from the area where they came from and charged right at the night elves. The night elf men began to use their talents, and to the shock of the Spartan, those men armed with staves unleashed tornadoes that stopped several orcs and sent them into the air. The others who were armed with claws seemed to suddenly roar out and make the women hit with greater force and power. Cortana was trying to digest what was going on before her, and she was amazed. Incredible. Quotation mark. Not to be outdone, the orcs began to unleash their own powers as fell magic hit the battlefield. Waves of fire and dark glowing bolts of red energy flew into the air and struck at the night elves. Some of the women suddenly were screaming in pain and dropping their bows and holding their heads as if gripped in a nightmare. Some of the men were also burned by the bolts of fire. The Spartan weighed his options quickly. He knew that getting involved in this fight between two totally unknown species with unknown abilities was a powder keg of trouble waiting to be ignited. And the last thing he wanted was to be the spark that set it all off. On the other hand, these night elves or whatever they were could hold answers that he might need. He knew that his decisions could decide his fate with one blow, yet he had no other option as he knew nothing of the land, and from what he could see from the way the orcs attacked, they were fanatical and brutal. The Spartan had been trained to see the state of a person's being, and from what he could see in the way the orcs fought, they were murderous and fanatical, not the sort one allied with unless in dire straits. The night elves on the other hand. He spoke to Cortana. We're making a move. Quotation mark. Cortana then replied. I hate it when you say that. I know you, but what the heck, I like your brand of action already, big guy. So just one question, exactly who are we going to help in this morass? The Spartan replied by taking his SRS-99D, S2AM sniper rifle to his shoulder and taking aim at his first target of the night. Horizontal ellipsis. Boom. One of the Twilight's Hammer clan orc warlocks only had enough time to roar just as she lost her head. Literally, as the night elves looked on in shock, and so did the rest of the Twilight's Hammer strike force, were suddenly stopped dead in their tracks as one their supporting spellcaster was now hitting the ground as she was now a headless corpse. The next one to get hit was another warlock as another roar came out and smashed right into his chest. The impact sent bloody flesh and bone as the orc now had a massive hole in the chest area. He could only gape in shock as a river of his blood flooded out of his mouth as well as the maw in his chest as he dropped dead. The two were not alone as two more warlocks were suddenly shot with the same mammoth roars being heard at the very same time, and the first warlock had half his arm and a portion of his chest ripped off by the sheer force of whatever it was that hit him. The second also had a massive hole where his stomach used to be, and he was sent to hit the ground with a wet thumb. The silence that followed left both groups stunned, but some of the orcs tried to attack once more, only to be greeted by another roar that ripped the leg of another orc with brutal force, and then something landed on the ground with a thump on the ground before several orcs, and then an explosion occurred, and as the smoke cleared, several orcs were crying in pain and shock as some had limbs blown off while some had gaping wounds on their bodies. The night elves tried to grasp what had happened. They had lost their unknown quarry and then were attacked by the orcs and their forces, and now it seemed that something was killing the orcs. It was then that the two sides were able to see something come out from a cave a fair distance from them all. It was the Spartan himself, who still carried that mammoth rifle that made what the dwarves of Ironforge used as a simple toy. The Spartan said nothing and fired another round. This time it cut into 3 of the still stunned orcs and literally killed all 3 of them. The round tore through their bodies like they were not even there, and the stench of gunpowder filled the air easily enough. The orcs roared and charged right at the green and black armored being, who placed down the rifle and took out another one, and then with near godlike speed, charged into the orcs and began to fire into them. The sounds of the weapon firing, the flash of fire, the unmistakable smell of gunpowder, and the deaths of the orcs was shocking to the stunned night elves, as they could only watch as the giant tore into the orcs with ruthless power. The Spartan was quick on his feet, cutting down several of the orcs with several controlled bursts of his MA5CICWS assault rifle. The ones that got close tried to cut the Spartan down with their weapons. But they were not going to get far, as the Spartan lashed out with powerful counter-attacks. One orc was sent flying back with a powerful strike to the neck that broke it instantly. Another got kicked in the chest and sent smashing hard into another tree, breaking several ribs. One more got kneed and was shot in the face with a burst of the assault rifle's rounds, reducing its face into bloody confetti. The rest of the orcs were soon finding out that attacking the Spartan was a serious mistake, as the unknown being was proving to be deadly in close combat. The Spartan quickly reloaded his MA5C while taking out his combat knife and slashed out with such blinding speed and accuracy and cut down several orcs by cutting their throats while evading their weapons. Once they dropped dead and bleeding, several more orcs were cut down. The 7.62 mm FMJ rounds of the assault rifle was more than enough to slice through the armor worn by the orcs with terrifying ease that scared the ones watching on both sides, as the rounds sliced through the orcs with ease. The Spartan also used his M6G Magnum as he threw his combat knife right into the chest of another attacking orc armed with a spear, and before the orc could even look to see the weapon lodged deeply in his chest, the Spartan introduced the Magnum into his face and blasted the orc dead center. The round easily tore into the skull of the orc, and the internal explosive fuse inside the bullet exploded and easily shredded the brain of the orc and killed it easily. Another orc tried to attack quickly, but the Spartan fired several more rounds and stopped the orc from attacking with his axe as the hand was blown apart and before it could pick up the discarded axe. The Spartan fired another round right in the face of the orc. The Spartan quickly resorted to the MA5CICWS assault rifle and blasted down several more of the orcs that came at him. The orcs now focused all of their attention on the Spartan, as he proved to be a far more serious threat for them than the night elves themselves. The slaughter went on until the Twilight's Hammer group unleashed their ogre to crush this monster in human form. The ogre wasted no time to try and kill the Spartan, but the only reward it got for its efforts was its chest being shredded by the Spartan's weapon, as the rounds were quickly able to slice through the armor the ogre had on. The assault rifle, however, went dry and that ogre attacked, swinging its club once more as the Spartan placed the weapon on his back. The stone head-covered weapon, however, missed as the Spartan leaped over it and charged right at the ogre and sent a powerful right punch into the stomach, crushing past the plate armor with ease and sending the two-headed ogre backwards and hurling out wads of spittle and blood at the force of the attack. The Spartan followed with a massive spinning side kick that smashed hard into the left head at the lower jaw, shattering it with amazing force, sending the left head smashing into the right one, forcing the creature to actually reel from the kick given to it by the Spartan. The two-headed creature barely had time to react as the Spartan quickly took out what appeared to be a barbell-sized device. But then a strange glowing blade appeared and the Spartan quickly decapitated the ogre's two heads and it dropped to the ground in a bleeding heap. The other orcs charged at the Spartan as he readied the sword, and to their surprise, the weapon that the Spartan had in his hand was more than able to cut through flesh, bone and armor, as it was nothing but tin foil. The smell of burning flesh, superheated metal, and ozone filled the air as the Spartan continued to slash out with the Sangheili energy sword and cutting down orc after orc. One of the surviving warlocks unleashed a powerful fireball at the Spartan, and this time the Spartan was hit as he turned at the sight of the fireball. The orcs that were still alive roared in triumph, and the night elves thought that their unexpected ally was dead. But that was changed when several orcs were suddenly shredded along with the warlock, who danced a bit due to the bullets that tore into him as he fell dead. The surviving Twilight's Hammer forces looked on in terror as the Spartan appeared from the inferno unharmed. The warlocks roared in anger and tried to unleash yet another fireball, but the Spartan was quick to attack at high speed and was before the warlocks and cut them down with tremendous speed. The warlocks were easily cut down and the rest of the orcs tried to attack once more, only to be greeted by the Spartans' energy shields that was unknown to them, and their weapons bounced off with ease, unleashing green energy that crackled in the night as the Spartan easily retaliated with the energy sword. The Twilight's Hammer clan were known for their nihilistic natures, and so they didn't retreat as they attacked. However, this only made them become easy target as that the Spartan moved away and placed aside his energy sword and returned to using his MA5CICWS assault rifle to finish off the rest of them. By the time the battle was over, an entire orc raiding force had been laid to waste by the Spartan as he then walked over the bodies, methodically killing the ones who were still alive after the carnage by shooting them in the back of the head at the place that would easily ensure a quick and painless death for those who he had just reduced into a bloody mess. All the while the light from the moon reflected on his armor and the visor he had on him, and the bursts of fire from his rifle further added to the image of an armored being of death. As soon as he was done making sure that the orcs were all dead, he turned to his attention to the night elves after loading fresh magazine to both his MA5 CICWS assault rifle and the M6G Magnum and decided to talk to them, hoping that he had made the right choice in aiding them in fighting these orcs. This left the night elves, who were still shocked at the sight of the Spartan walking towards them through the bloody and brutal battlefield, seemingly unharmed. They had seen many bloody battles before and had taken part in their fair share of battles as well, but this was something that was unlike any battle that they had been in, all due to the fact that so many of the enemy had been slaughtered by only one being. As soon as he was before them, they were tense and ready to defend themselves lest he turned on them as well, though they doubted that they were going to have any success. However, the unknown being placed aside the weapon and they finally heard his voice. "Why have you been following me?" The female night elves looked at the giant with great shock, awe, and fear, while the men were also still trying to figure out what to do. Night elf men were strong individuals, but this giant of a being was more than enough to make them look weak. He had punched an ogre right in the stomach, crushed the armor plating there and made the ogre literally lose its dinner before decapitating the creature with that glowing blade. Kaylin then decided to speak out. Since this behemoth seemed to speak the human language, she decided to use the human tongue to find out who or what was this being. "I am Kaylin, Nightwalker of the Sentinels. Who are you?"